Hello and welcome to the Q3Q active reading strategy for 12-step literature. Today we're going to be learning how to use the Q3Q strategy along with a template so that we are able to study a passage from 12-step literature anywhere, anytime. And let's talk about the strategy itself and what does Q3Q mean. The first Q stands for quote. And then there are three questions that we ask ourselves in this reflective reading practice to pry deeper into the meaning behind that quote and how we can apply the wisdom from 12-step literature to our lives. The first thing we need to do when we are preparing for the Q3Q active reading strategy is to create our own template. The first thing we'll have to do with this template is to add 4 section labels. These labels are as follows: quote, message, experience, and invitation. Now it's important that the message, experience, and invitation sections have a question mark at the end because we are essentially trying to ask a question to ourselves about the quote. That way we can respond reflectively with the message contained in the passage from 12-step literature. I would recommend adding about 2 spaces between each section label. I'm using a electronic document here, but this would be the same process when you're using pen and paper. The next thing you'll need to do once you've created your Q3Q template is to make sure that you have a 12-step book or another piece of spiritual literature nearby and available to study, that you have something to write with, and that you've written down all 4 section headings on your sheet of paper. You've now completed your own setup for the Q3Q template. Next, we're going to be copying down a short passage, preferably of less than 50 words, from our 12-step literature to complete the quote section of the Q3Q template. Once you've found a passage from your source of literature, we're going to want to copy down the passage directly as a quotation underneath the quote heading of our Q3Q template. We will also want to make sure that we've used quotation marks in our quote so that we avoid any plagiarism concerns. And we're also definitely going to want to add any of the reference information that we can find, so that way we are attributing the original source and can find it again at another time. Once we've copied down the quote and added our reference source, we have completed the quote section of the Q3Q template. The next section of the Q3Q template, and the first in which we will respond directly in our own writing, is in the message section. Before we start writing in the message section, we're going to want to reflect on the question: what is the author trying to say to me? What is the author trying to say to me? And then we read the quote again, slowly and carefully. And then in 1 to 3 sentences, we will respond to the guiding question: what is the author trying to say to me? And we'll take our time to write a response. I have just copied and pasted this for example, where I have written as a response to the quote: when I look deep enough for the truth, I can realize that my problems are often based on self. I might not always realize how much or how often I'm running on self-will, but it can be extreme at times. Now, if you're following along with this example, I strongly encourage you to write your own response to the quote we've selected for this demonstration. And once you have done so, you will have completed the message section of the Q3Q template. Moving on to the third section of the Q3Q template, which is the experience section. Similarly to what we did in responding to the message section heading, we are going to respond to a question that is stated as, how do I personally relate to this message? How do I personally relate to this message? Holding that question in mind, we will once again read the quote through carefully and slowly. And then in 1 to 3 sentences, we will respond to the guiding question. How do I personally relate to this message? And I have copied down the response I've written previously. As I asked the question and reread the quote, my response is, I remember being depressed and full of self-pity when I had been in Port Angeles for a while. Due to my exposure to the message of AA/the 12 steps, I was able to see the connection between my selfishness and my suffering. Again, I strongly encourage you at this point to complete your own version of the experience section of the Q3Q template in your own words from your own experience. Once you have done so in 1 to 3 sentences, you have completed the experience section of the Q3Q template. Finally, we are at the invitation section of the Q3Q template, which is the last written response we will be providing for this exercise. In responding to the invitation section, we want to ask ourselves the question, what is this message suggesting that I do? What is this message suggesting that I do? And we will reread the quote carefully and slowly, and in 1 to 3 sentences respond to the invitation guiding question. What is this message suggesting that I do? And I'm copying down a response I had written earlier, which reads as follows. This is a specific set of pages in the book that my sponsor directed me to read every morning, and I really did that for several months with moderate consistency. I should try reading pages 60 through 62 some more. And I strongly encourage you to take the time to write out your own response to the invitation section by reading the quote and using that guiding question. What is this message suggesting that I do? And once you've done so, you will have completed the invitation section of the Q3Q template. And congratulations, you have completed one entire round of the Q3Q reflective reading strategy for 12-step literature. You've made your own Q3Q template, and you have gone through and completed each of the 4 sections, the quote, the message question, the experience question, the invitation question, and you are now finished.